We all long for happiness. It's the thing we most dream for.
Hail to the altruistic revolution. Let's go for it.
Now the first exercise is just going to get us ready for the big finale. Thank you. I thought that I would start today by asking you all a question. As you come in here, you can go ahead and raise your hand. How many of you already know one science-based tip for happiness? So, for example, how many of you already know, keep your hands up, let's keep your hands up. How many of you already know that, for example, gratitude leads to happiness, or that compassion is highly correlated with a happy life? Okay, so everybody has their hand up already. I had a feeling that this is going to be the case, that you guys don't actually need me to give a talk about the science or the secret to happiness, that you don't need 3 science-based tips for a joyful life, because you're here at the Happiness and Its Causes conference and you already know the secret to a joyful life. So I thought that this was going to be the case. And so instead of giving you tips for a joyful life, I thought that I would teach you how to be anxious and pathetic by giving you 3 science-based tips for certain misery. Because you just aren't going to get this kind of information anywhere else at the Happiness and Its Causes conference. So you know that I am a sociologist and have studied happiness for the last 15 or so years, but you probably don't know that I also have a rich history or experience with anxiety and misery. So today, I am going to draw on the science, of course, but also my loads of experience as a stressed out, overachieving, recovering perfectionist. So without further ado, I'm going to give you 3 tips right now. My first tip for a life of certain misery is to really worry about what other people think of you, and really try to please everyone. Now, people-pleasing, in my extensive personal experience, is a process by which we try and assess what we think other people will, what we think will make other people really like us. And it's a really subtle and usually totally unconscious attempt at manipulating what other people think of us, trying to influence what other people think of us. Now, here's why that's going to make you really anxious and pathetic. Anytime we're exerting more energy trying to influence what other people think of us than we are authentically expressing ourselves, we end up totally out of integrity with ourselves. And being out of integrity with ourselves makes us anxious and weak. To be happy, we need to be totally in integrity. We need to be open and honest and authentic. This is because we human beings need the truth in the same way that we need food. And in this age of social media and personal brands, and in this time of performance and pretend, we are just starving for the truth, our truth, to show our truth to other people and know that they still love us. And yet, so many of us care so much about what other people think of us that we pretend all the time. We pretend to be happy to be somewhere that we'd actually rather not be. We fake a smile in order to hide our anxiety or our anger. Or maybe we post something on social media that makes it seem like we're having a great day or a great time, when really we're kind of down in the dumps. We pretend in order to bridge the gap between who we really are and who we want other people to see us as. And the problem with this is that pretending in any form, even if it's about something that's kind of meaningless or it's meant to protect somebody else, pretending is always a form of lying. And lying is one of the most stressful things that human beings can do. It stresses our bodies. The lie detectors or the polygraph tests don't actually detect lies, of course. They detect the stress, the physical stress of lying in our bodies. When we pretend and people please or lie, our body just howls with signals. Our heart rate goes up, our breathing changes, our vocal tone changes, the amount of moisture on our skin changes. It's as though our body is just screaming for us to stop and to just tell the truth. So, by all means, if you want to be anxious and miserable, go ahead and keep people-pleasing. In addition to causing you massive anxiety, it's also known, science does show us that it tends to lead to trouble sleeping and to increase our headaches and sore throats. Okay, tip number 2 for a life of certain misery comes from warriors of all kinds, and that is to show no mercy, to really hold grudges, and to do this even when it comes to yourself. So in order to understand this tip for a miserable life, we need to understand what mercy is, and mercy is kind of an abstract concept, but I really like Anne Lamott's definition of mercy. She defines mercy as radical kindness that has been bolstered by forgiveness. And the science does show that when we withhold mercy, or when we withhold kindness and forgiveness, this is just definitely a sure route to anxiety and misery. So the data related to mercy, related to kindness and to forgiveness are unequivocal. Research shows that when we withhold forgiveness, for example, it can really hurt our health. It can make painful health conditions like a back injury or headaches much worse. And when we do the opposite of forgive, when we try and exact revenge, research also shows that even though we think it's going to make us feel better, it does tend to make us feel worse. For example, one study took people who had been taken advantage of, and they gave them the opportunity to punish the person who'd taken advantage of them. Now, all these people thought that they were going to feel much better once they'd exacted revenge. But in fact, once they'd been able to punish their offender, they felt much worse. So why is this? Why would it be that punishing somebody who's taken advantage of us doesn't make us feel better? Well, revenge in almost all forms causes us to really put a lot more time and energy into the person who has hurt us. It causes us to dwell on painful circumstances for longer. So you can see why this is actually a really good tactic for becoming more anxious and pathetic, because it causes us to spend more time in the negative. But on the other hand, researchers who study forgiveness versus revenge show that forgiveness has tremendous health benefits, and that forgiving someone else can really improve all kinds of health outcomes, from high blood pressure and heart problems to chronic pain and mood disorders. So how is it that we show mercy, right? How do we start to show mercy? Well, we begin by showing kindness, by offering kindness to those who have hurt us, and maybe even towards ourselves in a difficult situation. We may not be able to get rid of our negative thoughts about somebody or about ourselves. We certainly may not be able to control the other person or to change them, but we can control how kind we show up. We can send loving and kind thoughts to people who have hurt us, for starters. And then there's this forgiveness piece, right? Forgiveness is that factor that takes simple kindness really to the next level. Now, I used to think that I couldn't really forgive someone unless they'd asked me for forgiveness, preferably in the form of a heartfelt and moving apology letter, for example. And so the classic was, I had been in a fight with my husband, and I really felt that he had wronged me, but, we'd worked through it, and I was feeling better, and I was ready to forgive him. But he had not asked me for forgiveness. And so what I did was I sent him a blog post that I wrote about how to make a really effective apology. Now, it is not going to surprise you to hear that this did not work. I was very clear, and it was very frustrating for me. Human beings are so annoying in that they do not apologize when we want them to, even if we give them really clear instructions. No. Kidding aside, I have learned through that experience and others that we must forgive in order to feel better, whether or not our offenders have asked us for forgiveness. And this is the really hard part. We need to do it whether or not our offenders are still hurting us. Right? That is very hard to think about. But make no mistake, I am not saying that we need to condone the bad behavior if it's still occurring, right? Forgiveness is not the same as approval or permission to continue. It is not encouragement. It is definitely not asking for more. What I am saying is that forgiveness is something that we do to feel better ourselves, to feel happier, and to have more peace in our lives. And we do it whether or not we are asked for forgiveness. As Marianne Williamson once very wisely wrote, any resentment you hold on to is a wall in front of your heart. No technique other than forgiveness can remove it, and no one but you can do it. This is a photograph of Delbert Tibbs, who was wrongfully incarcerated for many years and spent most of his time in prison on death row awaiting execution for a crime he did not commit. In situations like Delbert's, or in much less extreme situations, we must forgive whether or not we're asked for forgiveness, and sometimes we need to do it every day, or on bad days, every hour. It's one of those things that can be really difficult for us to do, but we do it in order to feel better. And, unfortunately, sometimes forgiveness is not a one-time deal thing. It's not a one and done. It's an ongoing practice. But fortunately, when we do manage an act of mercy for someone who has cost us sleep or love or maybe even our freedom, something miraculous happens. As Anne Lamott says, when we manage a flash of mercy for someone who we don't like, especially a truly awful person, including ourselves, we experience a great spiritual moment, a point of view that can make us gasp. Now, here's the real miracle to me. It's that our mercy boomerangs back to us. When we manage to show mercy for someone else, we can also start to show it to ourselves. We can start to love and to accept and to forgive ourselves. And in my experience, that can make our suffering worth it. My third and final advice for a life of anxious misery is to resist anything difficult or painful with all your strength. So you may have heard the truism that what we resist persists. That teaches us that we can really prolong pain and misery through resistance. Research by Kristen Neff and others shows us that we can use resistance to increase our suffering, while acceptance, particularly self-acceptance, is one of the little-known secrets to happiness. Now, this to me is super counterintuitive, right? To understand this idea that we do better, we are happier when we don't resist pain and difficulty didn't really make any sense to me. How is it that we actually stop resisting that which hurts? It feels like every fiber in our bodies really does want to resist things that are painful for us. So I actually find it really helpful to think about what our alternatives are to acceptance when we're in a difficult situation. So, for example, we can definitely always blame other people for our difficult circumstances, and especially for our bad feelings. That tends to make us feel really isolated. So another solid tactic for a life of misery, blaming other people. Alternately, we can really nurse our anxiety and despair by ruminating on the things that we cannot control and that we don't like. Or we can deny that we're in pain or that we're facing difficulty, perhaps by pretending that our troubles don't bother us at all. So we've got blame, rumination, denial. These are all solid tactics for resistance, and unfortunately, folks, they will not protect us from pain. Ironically, these tactics of resistance allow our troubles to further embed themselves into our psyche. So what is it we do? How do we practice acceptance? Now, again, this is super counterintuitive to me, but behavioral science and great wisdom traditions alike really point us towards the simple acceptance, right? Towards really just accepting that which we don't like and that which we can't control, particularly when we're in a really difficult or painful situation. And to do this, we need to accept the circumstances that we're in, and also, this is the trickier one for most people, the feelings that we have about those circumstances. So perhaps you have a really difficult neighbor, or you have a difficult relationship with one of your in-laws, for example. We need to accept that the relationship is difficult, and also perhaps that we feel really saddened by the difficulty or frustrated and angry about it. Now, this does not mean that things will never change, right? We can work to make a relationship better at the same time that we accept that the relationship right now is really hard. Acceptance is absolutely not the same thing as resignation, right? It is bringing a peace to a certain situation. Maybe things will get better in the future, maybe they won't. But when we bring acceptance to difficulty and pain, it allows us to soften a little bit. And it is that softening that opens the door to our greatest compassion and our greatest wisdom. And I think you will probably agree with me that in this world, we need access to our greatest wisdom and compassion. So there you have it. There is the secret to a life of anxious misery. Let's review. Number 1, relentlessly people please. Go ahead and set up a massive facade. That will make you happy or miserable. Number 2, Show no mercy to yourself or those people around you. And number 3, really actively resist every aspect of your current reality that you don't like and you can't control, even the weather. Or we can flip this, and what we have is the secret to a life of joy and fulfillment. Number 1, we can be true to ourselves without worrying what other people think of us. We can trust that our integrity is enough. Number 2, we can be kind to ourselves and to others. When people behave badly, including ourselves, we can show mercy. And number 3, we can bring acceptance and curiosity to the circumstances and emotions and the people that we cannot control. So I'm going to sum this up by breaking it down one more step for you. There are really 2 options here. For a life of misery, we've got option A, which is a life of pretending and resentment and rejection. Or we've got option B for a joyful life, which is one that is full of truth and mercy and acceptance. Both options are always available, and the choice is always ours. Thank you.